This idea of inclusion, on some level, it's kind of a pity that we need to do this in the first place, don't you think? Yes. There's challenges that are out there, and sometimes we are distracted and we forget what we really know and what our parents taught us early on. How do we be present for others? How do we create a space where no matter who you are or where you're from, that everybody has an opportunity to share a gift? The psalmist wrote, Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid, I will place Adonai before me always. Shiviti is translated as I will place, and it shares a root with the word shaveh, which also means equal. So the founder of Chassidut, the founder of the Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov, he understands the verse not as I will place Adonai before me, but instead he says, all are equal to me because Adonai is always before me. If we're created in God's image, all of us without exception, then, as he says, all are equal to me because Adonai is always before me. When we are truly aware that everyone, regardless of abilities or disabilities, is both connected and unified in purpose and in essence, only then can we become content. Content with ourselves, with our community, with our synagogue, with our county, with our world. Only then will we become a Kehillah Kedosha, that holy, sacred community. That's what we're striving for. That's what the other congregations and the other parts of our Jewish community, that's all what we're striving for. Kehillah Kedosha, a holy, sacred community. So there's different things that are happening. We're going to have two friends come and speak with us in just a moment. We've told you when we first started, a number came after a little bit later, it's okay, that we have this little handout that talks about the work that our inclusion committee is doing. Their names on the bottom of the back page has their aspirations, the things that they're striving for, where we have been, what we have done. And right now, the work that they're doing is so significant because it isn't just about how do we make a ramp. It's talking about how do we shape a community. How do we provide safe space for everyone to tell their story and for others to hear them? How can we start making sure that little by little we won't need an inclusion Shabbat? But right now we still do. We think we're doing okay, but we have a lot still to do and a long way to go. But between large print prayer books and lighter ones to make sure that people can participate, have an opportunity to stream these services, to make sure that there are seats available in case somebody comes with a wheelchair, those are some of the things that we're trying to do. Some of you might have noticed that there's a new table in the front. Thank God. Not only was the last one going to fall, but this one was designed with one of our congregants' gifts to that Torah writing project. Remember, for many of us, we were participating in writing letters into a brand new Torah. The Torah has been with us for now more than a year, and some of those gifts went to do certain things. One of them was to have a reading table, and our congregants had supported our vision to make sure that we can be inclusive. So this table does something a little funny. If you move it all the way to the side, if you move it all the way to the side, that's it. And then there's a secret place that I'm going to be right back. Why would we do this? So there's a little piece that's coming out the side over here. Why would we do this? If somebody wants to read Torah or have an aliyah and they're in a wheelchair or they can't stand for very long, they'd be able to have access. We want to provide inclusion not just about the doors or the bathrooms, but also to the Torah. Shouldn't we be a place where we make sure that everybody has access, where everybody feels included? And it isn't just about ability or disability. We have work to do, but we're trying. And this inclusion committee, I'm so grateful for our kind of taking all of this energy and working with other people and making some goals and creating a mission statement that you'll see at the bottom of that page. And if you didn't have it, you'll get it on your way out. It's worthy to read. They worked hard on it, but it is important to teach. And when we have people being generous and able to support some of the things that we're trying to do to transform lives, make a difference in our world and in our synagogue, well, then great things will continue to happen. So we'll thank our friends a little bit later, but now we have two other friends who are going to share some stories, messages about inclusion and where they have encountered it or not. And first I'm going to ask our Rabbi Emerita to come forward, Rabbi Deborah Bronstein. I'm going to put it back for you. There you go.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I love this amud, this table. It's just fabulous. It's the best. I was 14 when I first learned I had epilepsy. I had a wonderful bedroom in the attic of our home. I had a convulsion and fell out of bed. My parents heard the sound and rushed upstairs. They saw me having a seizure and were terrified. I woke up in the emergency room where people were holding me down and a young doctor was giving me a spinal tap. It was confusing and frightening. A few days later, my pediatrician came to the hospital and sat close beside me. He whispered, "I first started having seizures after I was an adult. I was already a doctor. When my patients heard about my epilepsy, they left my practice. They were afraid. It took me years to get back to work. I suggest that you tell no one about this. It's a private thing. Most people won't understand." Two of us teenagers at my home congregation had epilepsy. We did not participate in citywide or overnight or away youth group activities. There was a lot of fear, a lot of stigma. Stigma still exists, but so much less today. Off and on, epilepsy has taken a big bite from my life. The first time was during my first year of rabbinical school, which was in Israel. Due to differences in treatments, I didn't get the medical care I needed while I was in Israel. I was over-medicated and confused and unable to succeed with my academic work. The dean encouraged me to drop out of the program, saying that it was unlikely that I would be able to work as a rabbi. Thankfully, I was supported by my Ulpan teacher, my modern Hebrew teacher, and my rabbinic Hebrew teacher, who had a daughter with special needs that he recognized the most she could do, and he recognized the most I could do, and they both supported me. Because of them, I made it into second year of rabbinical school, and after that, for several years, things were a breeze. In 1989, I was interviewing for my first position as a rabbi. I was invited to 5 different congregations for callback interviews. I knew that I was in no way legally obligated to tell a potential employer about my seizures, but I wanted to land at a supportive congregation. At my first callback interview, I went out to a restaurant with the senior rabbi, and over soup, I told him that I had epilepsy, and though I didn't have seizures often, they were a possibility. His spoon slipped out of his mouth and into the soup bowl. "You should have told me this before I called you back," he said. "I would never have proceeded this far with the interview." And then he blushed and apologized and said that he didn't mean that, but I knew that that was the end of the interview. My health had been very good during my time at my first congregation, and I didn't feel compelled to tell the search committee at Har Hashem immediately about my epilepsy. But later, when a small group of us sat down to negotiate my contract, again, I felt that I should disclose my condition. "Rabbi," one of the members of the committee interrupted, "this isn't legally necessary. In any way, we already know." I would say that my journey with epilepsy has become more difficult in my later years, and that the support of Har Hashem has been invaluable. I went from having 2 or 3 seizures a year to 1 every other day. By the early 2000s, my seizures had become refractory, which means uncontrollable with medication. Most of my seizures take place in my sleep, but I was regularly in a confused state the next day. At a certain stage, I was on so much medication that it affected my ability to think. When I was talking with someone on the phone, I would type what I was saying onto the computer, and I would type what they were saying onto the computer, because by the end of the sentence, I couldn't remember the beginning. Once, and I still feel embarrassed about it, I had a major convulsive seizure on the Bima on the second night of Rosh Hashanah. I don't remember it at all, of course, but I do remember some faces of loving people from Har Hashem in the emergency room afterwards. I had a surgery a few years later that was unsuccessful, and from which it took months to recover. Again, I was amazingly supported. The synagogue as an institution was very understanding to me and my special needs. 12 years ago, I found a seizure dog who is so smart, and she was able to give me a heads up when I was going to have a seizure. As a working dog, she was welcome at Har Hashem. Even when it came time for me to retire, due to the fact that my seizures had become an impediment to my work, the entire retirement process was handled by the leadership of the congregation with extraordinary dignity and support. I've always appreciated the timing of my birth. There was no such thing as a woman rabbi in the United States until 1972. And when I first brought up the possibility of my becoming a rabbi, everyone in my world laughed. But by the time I was ready to go into rabbinical school, it was a recognized possibility. The stigma against epilepsy had decreased significantly by 1957, the year I was born. In the United States, for instance, people with epilepsy were forbidden to marry in 17 states until 1956. The last state to repeal this law did so only in 1980. In 1956, 18 states provided for sterilization on eugenic grounds of people with epilepsy. In some parts of the world, epilepsy is still commonly viewed as a reason for annulling marriages or simply prohibiting them. Unemployment and underemployment among people with epilepsy exists worldwide. In the United States, the first law to prohibit discrimination against people with physical disabilities was passed in 1973. However, it was limited in scope. It was not until 1990 that the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act provided a more uniform remedy to persistent discrimination. Until the 70s, for example, it was still legal in the United States to deny persons with seizures entry to restaurants, theaters, rec centers, and other public places. These employment and legal restrictions further perpetuated the stigma attached to epilepsy in modern society. We have a teaching in our tradition that comes from one of Rabbi Green's favorite texts, Pirkei Avot, which rejects stigma and restrictions against those with disabilities. It says, Ben Azai taught, do not disdain any person. Do not underrate the importance of anything, for there is no person who does not have his or her hour, and there is nothing without its place under the sun. I am hopeful that through the activism and stewardship of the Inclusion Committee, our staff and lay leadership, that everyone will feel welcome in this house of God. No one will ever feel excluded or disdained. We've made a good start. There's still much to do. Thank you.
Elizabeth, will you come forward Rabbi Bronstein, thank you. We'll thank you more later. Hi there.
Shabbat Shalom. Change glasses. Well, I was invited here to give you a glimpse into my role of being a parent of a child with disabilities, and to suggest that being an ally to people affected by disability begins with a shift in perspective. My youngest son was born with an extra 21st chromosome, a condition commonly known as Down syndrome. Having a person with Down syndrome in one's family comes with many perks and also challenges. Fortunately, challenges turn into strength. Having nearly lost my medically fragile child will never not feel raw. The flip side is I never forget to delight in and honor the boy I got to keep. Because my family's been through a lot, we've learned to be resilient, appreciative, and open-minded. We remain unruffled around people who seem different. We're quick to celebrate life's special, ordinary moments. When my firstborn eagerly swallowed puree off a baby spoon and signed his first word, fan, I called my mom so she could kvel with me. It was like having a little party. When Raphael, who has Down syndrome, first stood up for 2 whole seconds, we felt like throwing a parade. Watching human development happen in slow-mo can be nerve-wracking because there's so much unknown ahead. It's also a joy, terrifying and liberating at the same time. Infants and toddlers typically grow quickly, but I got to enjoy having a baby for a long time. All the while, there have been loads of extras to juggle. Parenting, as many here tonight know firsthand, it's not easy. Raising a child with special needs is parenting on steroids. Now that Raphael's health is mostly stable, I fight for him to have the same opportunities as any other kid. I want him to build lasting friendships. I want him to get an education to lead to a productive, meaningful life. I say fight because it often is. We've been turned away. But the sting of discrimination is not always blatant. The local charter school tells me that it might not be a good fit for one of my kids. When a swim instructor places my boy in the class for toddlers, ableism has kept her from thinking of ways to include Raphael with peers his own age. Before Raphael, I chose my seat far from the drooling man making uncomfortable noises on the bus. When I couldn't understand the mom with cerebral palsy talking to me in the park, I just smiled and nodded. Since Raphael, I've learned to embrace curiosity, and I ask her to repeat her words until I understand. There's much to gain by moving closer to those who act differently, but we're masters at avoiding the discomfort that comes with it. When I sign up my son for activities, people hesitate and point me toward their supervisor because it's easier to assume it's their job, It's easier to assume it's someone else's role to help than it is to ask me directly what we need for my child to fit in. I don't expect people to consider every potential human need and try to meet them all. But I do want people to assume it's their job to open themselves to asking what's needed, even when they may not be able to provide it. I want to be more welcoming. I recommend we explicitly invite people in our lives to tell us what would support their inclusion. I'd rather be asked what I need, even when I don't know the answer. I admit parenting is a distinct chore for me compared to moms of typically developing kids. My child needs intensive support with dressing, washing, and other activities of daily living. We constantly have to adapt every little thing. It is difficult. And also, I believe what any parent would do. If your gut reaction is to disagree, maybe you are defining me by our differences. In reality, we are more alike than different. Let me share the lesson I keep learning on this journey. The hardest part of having a loved one with a disability is those who aren't disabled. When I bring my boys to Friday night services, Raphael steers me to the front row, even when we're embarrassingly late. He sings Hebrew-ish, off-key, loudly. He pulls out his air guitar and he joins Holly, playing his invisible instrument and dancing awkwardly. We get dirty looks. We get just plain puzzled looks too. I've learned to expect it. I turn and lock eyes with the child or adult staring at us. I nod and smile and sing along, and most of the time, folks melt at this silent invitation to just go with it. In many ways, Jews are doing inclusion right. We know what it means to welcome a stranger. There is plenty more to do. During Raphael's first few years, I was drowning. I routinely worked after my kids fell asleep until 2 in the morning. My husband stressed over his job because we needed the reduced health insurance premium that came with it. I searched for assistance. Jewish Family Services and the Jewish Disability Network seemed like reasonable places to seek help. Each voicemail I left those organizations felt like another failure. Someone would call back and offer a different resource I should call. But when I did, the same thing happened. And after a while, I gave up. Giving someone who is struggling a resource to investigate may be the last thing she needs. I needed a person who would be a resource, ask questions, listen, acknowledge, help come up with potential answers together. Reaching out for help takes guts, and so does answering the call. I learned early in my parenting journey to expose my neediness, to ask for help, and to say yes to any offer of assistance. I got that it takes strength to show vulnerability. I invite you to open yourself to finding a yes when it comes to supporting people with disabilities. A few years back, during Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month, autism spokesperson Temple Grandin spoke here, along with a woman who described her struggles with her disabled child. Her son screamed constantly for years. Can you imagine? After the speaker finished, I talked to a friend in the audience. She asked me how to be an ally for families of a person with disabilities. I replied that when my kids were little, I wish someone would have asked us over for a Jewish holiday meal. I didn't have it in me to prepare a Passover Seder in those early years. She bristled. What am I supposed to do, invite a screaming kid to my house? Only recently have I come up with the correct answer. Be open to yes. Make space for what repels you. Instead of remaining comfortably separate, ask the mother of the screamer how she handles it. Explain why you're leery of inviting her. Perhaps she would appreciate a challah delivered to her door. Maybe she could use care for another child. If we're not willing to get creative, not courageous enough to brainstorm ways to include, maybe we are unwittingly excluding. Disability is a natural phenomenon. Expect it. Leave room for it. At day camp pickup last summer, I chatted with the mother of my kid's fellow camper on the Har Hashem playground. She told me her little girl asked about Raphael's differences. She wondered what to say to her daughter. I was thrilled for the opening. I told her to explain that people grow at different rates, and sometimes people need help with different things. I suggested her child could talk to my son and play with him. I often say inclusion is a verb. It's not enough to accommodate people with disabilities. The more important work is for the non-disabled to do. We can connect with those who are different. We can question our knee-jerk assumptions, avoid empty platitudes like, let me know what I could do to help. Instead, consider what would help if you were in another's shoes and do that. I'm figuring out this parenting a kid with disabilities thing every day, and I hope you'll be open to figuring it out with me.
We have some powerful messages to hear, and there are certainly many, many more. We're going to try and continue to share some of those stories. And by the way, for the kids in Youth Shabbat, our elementary school program in the other building, our high school kids are leading their Shabbat experiences. They have another student from our community named Yael, who is talking to them about living with autism and trying to build some bridges and help some understanding and provide some clarity. So there's a nice full night, and we're grateful for you for sharing your truths. We're grateful for our team from the Inclusion Committee for sharing your energy and vision, and let's return to the Siddur.